Am I in the season of my life where I can have it all and still keep my sanity and still feel like I am doing what I really want to do? And so I think it's starting to ask yourself the deeper questions, and knowing that you've already been going through these constant cycles of birth, growth, death, and rebirth and regeneration. This is now consciously working with that instead of going against the grain of where you are in your life.
Welcome to the Wildflower Diaries Show, where we have meaningful conversations and contemplations to bring you back to life. I'm Beth Schneider, your host and guide, to help you along your healing journey and to really start living life fully. We have forgotten that we are the builders, creators, weavers, lovers, visionaries and dreamers. Through these discussions, learn and implement practices to remember and reconnect to all of who you are. Your body, intuition, power, heart, voice, mind and magic are ready to be reclaimed so that you can make ripple effects of change that you know deep down you are made for. Let's get started with this week's episode.
Hope everyone is keeping well, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 6 of the Wildflower Diaries Show. And today I'm really excited to speak about reclaiming cyclical and regenerative living. And the reason I'm really passionate about this is it's had a really amazing effect on my life. And I've seen also the benefits of knowing the seasons that you're in and understanding how connected we are with nature and how that can change things. So we're going to jump in. Today I'm going to also be sharing from my screen a little bit of what I've got, which is the 11 stages of regeneration. And I'll be explaining a bit about why I believe it's important for us to live this way and how this can help you have less frustration, and also at what stages I see people needing assistance, like what do they need assistance within that stage? What should they be looking at when they're in specific stages of their lives? So up until now, most of us are used to living in a way where we've been taught that it should be linear. We must always be growing, achieving, getting more, doing more. And I think more people are finding that this just isn't working for them, and that something's been missing, and we've all been feeling that something's missing. And we've lost, often living in cities, like this connection with nature, and sometimes even a connection with a higher power, something about beyond us, And what I found is the more that I've reconnected with nature, I've realized that our natural rhythms as humans is actually connected to nature. And the way we've been living up until now has been very unnatural. And I think we're at a stage where we're starting to see that also just by looking at what is happening in the world. You can often already see the evidence that the way we are living with this constant growth is not sustainable. It's not sustainable for us as humans, and it's not sustainable overall as a whole. So let me share with you now, and if you're watching the replay or you're listening to it on the podcast, you can come to the YouTube channel to be able to see the actual presentation. So here are the actual stages of what I believe we should be looking at when it comes to living closer to nature. So firstly, I need to also thank my teachers. This is kind of something I've made from working with other people and seeing what kind of made a spin of it myself. So I have been studying herbalism with the School of the Sacred Wild. So there's part of what I'm putting in here is there's a lot of that Marissa teaches about regenerative living and working with the cycles of nature. And then also from working with Jen, who I've interviewed from the Celtic School of Embodiment. She does a lot around the actual Celtic Wheel of the Year, which I will probably speak about a bit more in another episode. But this is also something that our ancestors instinctively knew, and because they lived so much closer to nature, they had to live with the cycles of nature. So this is really a practice that I give to people to look at, so you can know where you're at. Because if you don't know which season you're in or what cycle you're in, it can often be that you feel like you're failing, that you're not enough, that there's something wrong with you. So with the 11 stages of regeneration, what I've said here is everything in nature has seasons and cycles. So if nature is left alone, it goes through constant cycles of birth, growth, death, rebirth, and regeneration. And we often have forgotten that we're part of nature, and we're not meant to live linear lives. And trying to do so is partly why we feel exhausted, like we're failing, and that we're not enough. So knowing what season you're in can actually really help you become compassionate with yourself and trust the timing of your life. So really what I've done this based on is the life cycle of a plant, because like they say, we're pretty much like a plant. And, we go through these cycles ourselves. If you go and look and do a recce of your life, we are constantly going through these seasons of birth and growth and death and rebirth, and what tends to happen is because of our conditioning, we tend to resist the death part, letting go of what we were so we can actually become who we're becoming, so we can step into who we're becoming. And we live in a society that is actually petrified of death. We resist speaking about it, we resist thinking about it, and unfortunately, with our death processes, there comes seasons of grief, and we often in such a busy life that we don't have that time to actually stop and actually grieve, so that we can go into the next stage of rebirthing. And also, we've been taught that we can have it all, and I'm not saying that we can't have it all, especially from the personal development field. It's really about you can have it all. And I'm not saying we can't, but I think it's about asking ourselves the question, do I actually want it all? And is trying to have it all serving me? Am I in the season of my life where I can have it all and still keep my sanity and still feel like I am doing what I really want to do? And so I think it's starting to ask yourself the deeper questions, and knowing that you've already been going through these constant cycles of birth, growth, death and rebirth and regeneration. So now consciously working with that instead of going against the grain of where you are in your life. So the internal winter really comes with the seed. We plant new seeds and they grow roots, and eventually, if they're watered and nourished, it will turn into a sprout and it'll grow. And many of us go through these internal winters when everything feels like it's just like, where am I? What is going on? Why is nothing working? There must be something wrong with me. And the internal winter, from my personal experience and from working with others, is when it's a transitional phase where everything feels like chaotic, like everything's falling apart and you don't really know what is going on, and you can't sometimes see the wood from the trees because it's dark, you're under the ground. So during these periods, this is a time where I notice a lot of intense growth that people might not necessarily see outside. They might not see the results of that growth until much later on, but it's a time where we actually being called to rest, to go inwards, and to ask ourselves sometimes the difficult questions that allows us to bring new life, and to actually grow. And what I found often in this winter is it's a phase of really letting go of what is no longer serving us so that we can grow into the next phase of our lives. So once we go through this seed and root and it's nourished, we start to sprout. And this can be a very difficult phase, the spring phase, sprouting, because you have to actually get out of the soil. And that takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of also letting go of whatever is stopping us from taking that leap and moving forward. So the sprouting phase can be quite difficult. And then we start to grow. We start to become a seedling, a plant, and we start to bud, and we go into this sort of closer to the summer phase of our being. And this summer phase is what we have been conditioned to believe is where we should always be. We should always be growing and always be blossoming and doing all these things externally that everyone can see, and then we can look successful and we can appear like we've got it all figured out. And like you can hear from me just speaking about it, it sounds exhausting, because it is. We can't constantly be there. So this growth phase that we go through before we bud and blossom, before we go into summer while we're still in spring, is really when we start to sort of see things changing in our lives. So all the things that we're working on with the seeds that we planted and nourished and allowed ourselves to come out of that soil phase into seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, we then go into this growth phase. And during the growth phase, often everything feels like it's working out better. We feel a lot more lighter, but there can be this during that phase where you start to feel a bit more watching what other people do, getting imposter syndrome, especially when we come closer to the summer phase of our lives, you know, when how is everyone else blooming? What is everyone else doing? Why am I not there faster? You know, why am I not getting to where everyone else is quick enough? And so this looking externally a lot of the time. So that phase is where you need to start looking at a little bit more of like, why do we want to be like everyone else? Why do we want to blossom the way someone else is blossoming when it's not our time right now to be doing that? So there's a lot also like looking at, why do we want to grow as fast as someone else? You know, I think often it's like looking at what does growth look like for someone else doesn't necessarily mean what that's going to mean for you in your life. So spring is still like figuring out who you want to be, what you want it to look like, and really trying to keep yourself in your lane and not constantly focusing on what everyone else is up to. Because if you're in your spring and someone else is in their summer and blooming, you can't compare it. It's two different seasons of life. You know, someone had to go through that period that you're in to get to where they are now. And we often discount that when we're outwardly looking at what everyone else is up to. So just knowing that when you're comparing yourself to others, it's often coming down to you being in a different phase to them. And it's not necessarily that they have this magic source, it's just that you need to keep focusing on your own internal growth, what's happening inside of you, instead of focusing on what they're up to. Yes, we can get inspiration, we can look to others for ways of moving forward, but often by looking too much at what other people are up to, we stunt our own growth, actually. We think that there's something wrong, and we actually don't get to the part where we blossom. So from there, we move into summer. And the bud is a very unique phase as well. So when we get past, we've sprouted, we've a seedling, we plant, we've grown. And now with this bud is starting to form. And the bud is what happens before a flower forms. And with the bud, what I've been in the bud for quite some time now, you feel like you've gone back into winter. You feel like you've gone back in the ground, because there's a lot of energy that starts to be used in order to form your petals, in order for you to look back at what has happened during your growth period and start to ask yourself, is this the right time for me to blossom? Because not all buds turn into flowers, yeah? And it's also a phase of where a lot of your insecurities will come up, because it's before you start to blossom, you ask yourself, am I even allowed to do this? Do I even deserve to become the flower, to have all of that, to have everything that I've always dreamed of, to actually get the things that I desire? And we've definitely been conditioned to almost believe we're not allowed what we really want. We're not allowed to desire, and even the word desire has been vilified in a lot of ways. So we get to that point and we start to question ourselves, and we start to question whether it's worth it, whether it's worth putting ourselves out there like this. Is it worth being seen in that way? And often that's when we actually stop ourselves from going into the bloom. But I want anyone to know that if that happens to you, not all is lost. Because if you don't blossom in that part, what still happens is that it's going to go down back into the soil, and it becomes compost, and it becomes your life lessons that you grow from, the foundations that you grow from. And if you don't go through winter properly and root properly, you're going to have a flailing plant that needs to go back down to the ground so that you can grow again with stronger roots. So it's never ever lost when we don't fully get to blooming and blossoming, because it just means that we're building the roots and the foundations to be able to do that from a place of deeper self-assured, like being more self-assured, more self-accepting, and trusting yourself to be able to blossom and handle what that means. Because when you go into the blossoming phase, that's when you're outwards. It's the summer phase. That's when you're giving to others. People are seeing that from you. And that phase is when you are in service and you're out in the world doing your thing, you know. And if you try to do that before you're ready, it can mean that you burn out. It can mean that you end up retreating and letting the flower, actually the petals, fall off quickly, because you don't want to stay up there because it's too vulnerable to be out there like that. So the blossoming phase, you know, we only do that in the phases that we are ready to do it. And when our roots from the winter and the spring, that phase, have been a strong enough foundation for us to be able to fully be out there and be of service from a place of integrity and a place of being within our strengths and within our what would you call that? Yeah, like being assured, more like secure within yourself, so that it feels okay to put yourself out there like that. And then after the blossom, flowers turn often into fruit. And then from that usually happens towards the end of summer, towards autumn time. And then there's a harvest. And this is the autumn phase. This is when we start to do a recce of everything that's happened before. We harvest, we get the abundance from the blossoming phase. And then things start to wilt. And that's when we need to start composting. That's when we need to start looking at the cycle and be able to recognize it as a death, because we need that. We can't constantly be in bloom. It's just not sustainable to be always out in the world and not having any moments at all in your life to go inwards and ask yourself questions. So during the autumn phase, this can be difficult because we want to hold on to the times that we were blossoming. We want to hold on to the phase where we were out there in the world enjoying everything and being seen. And we can sometimes hold on longer than is necessary to that blooming phase, that we don't get the fruit, or we burn out before we get the fruit. Yeah. We don't get the harvest that we could have had if we just knew that this was the end of this phase and that it was now time to allow whatever's been blossoming to die and for something new to be reborn. So once you go into in autumn, this is also the time of wilting, of composting. So nothing's ever lost. Even seeds sometimes don't grow. So that means that all of that just makes the soil more fertile. That makes the foundations that you grow from more fertile. And that's an inner thing. The soil is an inner foundation to grow off. I'm just going to stop sharing now. And so those are the 11 stages of regeneration. And how would this look in your life is what I want to share. Okay, so lots of people come to work with me when they're in a transition phase. So when you're when you've gone from autumn to winter and you now feel like you're stuck in the dark, it feels chaotic. It's like, I can't see anything. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure what's going on. That phase is often when people will come to work with me, because it is a phase where you do need to really release everything. That autumn winter phase is a phase of releasing everything that you're holding on to from the past. And that is composting it, using it so that you have something stronger to grow from in the next phase of your life. Because what we've lost along the way is these rites of passage. We're supposed to move through life and mature into different phases of our lives. But if you're holding on to an old phase for dear life, you're going to really struggle to grow into who you are meant to become. who you're supposed to become to be of service to the world, for example, because many people who come to me are here to make an impact and here to help other people also see the light of who they are. And what I've found is that is a phase where many people will know that they need to go and get help with working through, what do I need to let go of? What lessons do I need to learn from what's brought me to this moment now, so that I can move forward and actually grow from this space upwards. So normally what I found is when you're in this transition, it'll feel like a whirlwind, like chaos, like everything's falling apart. But what happens with that is it means it brings everything up to the surface for you to look at, so that you can pick out what needs to be left behind and what needs to stay for the next part of your journey. I know this journey, but for the next chapter of your life. And when you look at that, it gives you the opportunity to let go of what is no longer working and keep what is working. We don't have to let it all go. We don't need to always start from scratch. Like there's no just starting from scratch. We've learned some things along the way, and that becomes the wisdom that helps us move forward and do the things that we need to do. But once it feels unnatural in this current society, because it is a phase of really having to stop and go inwards, and we resist it. And that is also why it goes on for a longer period of time, because we're resisting it and we're trying to be somewhere else. We're trying to grow, we're trying to blossom, but we don't have the roots or the foundations just yet to allow us to do that. So if you're in that phase, you'll know you're in that phase from just even looking to it and hearing what I've said. You'll know you're in that phase because you can feel that heaviness and darkness, and it's time to let things go so that I can move forward and grow into this next version of myself. And often we've been taught also that we must never change. We must always stay the same and be who we've always been. And that is not actually true. Like, we are constantly evolving, and some people don't appear to be changing because, we have these beliefs that a leopard can't change its spots, and some people choose not to change, but they sit with that. They sit with what it does to them, with the regret, with the resentment, with the anger, with the rage, and you see it eat them up, whereas there'll be an inner calling for most people where it'll just be like, I can't keep doing what I've always done. This is what's called insanity, and there's so much out there, but certainty is actually insanity. Life doesn't work like that. We will constantly be changing and evolving throughout our lives. And the longer you hold on to something that needs to die and so that you can go into the next phase of your life, the harder it is, because that resistance, you sit with it, you feel discomfort, you deny what you really feel often. That's when you spiral a little bit, start overworking or over drinking or whatever it is that we use to help us through those phases. So it is really starting to know for yourself, am I in the time where I'm ready to evolve into the next step part of my life? And many women, for example, 28 is actually when you start to become an adult, and we miss that phase of actually going out of maiden into mother. And that's not necessarily becoming an actual mother, it's becoming a mother as an archetype. So we miss that phase and we stay in this internal maiden, which is trying to be out there all the time, trying to achieve, that we don't get the wisdom we need to really step into what our higher purposes is, what our calling actually is. We stick in jobs which we know aren't the right jobs for us. We stay in relationships that aren't working for us. We hold on for so long until we either choose to let it go, or life will force you to. And I think that is what, up until I started going on this journey and seeing these phases in my own life, I would often be in a situation where I'd be holding on for dear life, and then everything would go all over the place. And then I'd be like, oh, life's so unfair, it's so tough. But what I realized is that it was happening because I wasn't listening to my inner knowing that it was time to move on. It was time to let some things go. It was time to go into a different season. And until life forces you to do it. If you choose to walk into it, we'll all feel fear about doing that. But if you choose to walk into these seasons of your life, it becomes so much more graceful. It becomes so much more easier to just sink into that. It's okay. I don't need to be doing what everyone else is doing right now, because for me right now, I'm in this phase of my life, and this is what I need to give myself. And it saves a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of heartache, knowing what phase you're in, so that you can say, actually, this is where I'm at, and this is what's important right now. This is what I need to give myself right now. And this is what I'm going to focus on, so that I don't waste my time and energy trying to be like someone over there who's blossoming right now, because they maybe went through all of these stages that you're currently going through, and they learned the lessons from it, and that allowed them the opportunity to blossom. So don't look at your day one and compare it to someone's day 100. Look at what is happening for me right now. What is important for me right now? What do I need to give myself right now? And the more we do that, the easier it becomes to actually settle in to these different phases of our lives. And so the next part, like I say, when you go into spring and summer, is really knowing that a lot of your insecurities come up around those phases. And this is again where I often get people coming, because again can feel like, okay, I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm not allowed to do that. This is where people often need to give themselves permission to really shine, to really become, to really step into, if you want, whatever you want to call it, destiny, purpose, like step into what you know deep down in your soul is meant for you. And that takes courage. It takes a lot of bravery. And it takes letting go of what society has deemed as normal. It's letting go of what everyone is telling you is the right thing to do to be successful. And it means that we then feel very vulnerable, because what are people going to think? What are they going to say? How am I going to be able to step out there and be this version of myself? That because everyone is looking at you as who you were and not who you've become. So during this phase, it can feel very isolating, especially before you blossom. It can feel isolating. It can feel that people don't understand you. They don't know what you're going through. And it can feel a little bit like, it can stunt you from continuing to grow, because it can feel like, well, this is unsafe to continue to grow. So in that phase, really, it's about giving yourself permission and really stepping into what support structures are going to help you do that. So who can you rely on to speak to during those times, who are going to actually support you and not tell you you're getting too big for your boots, or who do you think you are, this is too much, or you're not enough to do this. That's the own internal inner critic likes to come up during that time period as well. And starting to actually let go of those beliefs about yourself and accept yourself, and know that you deserve to step into that. You deserve to become whoever you want to be. It doesn't even have to be who you're meant to be. It can be whoever you want to be. You're allowed to be that. And it can feel very unsafe to do that, because it goes against the grain. Then finally, when it comes to the bud, like I say, that's again when a lot of people are like, oh my word, I'm back in the ground. I don't know what to do to allow myself to really step into this. This is when we can really halt. But none of it's lost, like I said before. It's never, ever lost, because whatever you do, it is going to become compost and a foundation for you to continue to move forward from. We all will look back at our lives and look at every time we've grown and every time we've overcome. You were going through this already. You were going through these cycles already, and you've learned certain things and you've taken it with you and you've used that. And that is what it's about. It's never ever lost if you don't feel ready to step out there and be this who you feel deep down you want to be right now. It's okay to stop and take a step back and wait until you feel that it's the right time. But it's also good to know in this phase whether you're holding yourself back, because often there's never like a right time for these things. Sometimes we have to take a leap. Sometimes we have to say enough is enough, and I'm going to try, because once you do that, you often start to realize that possibilities can be endless when you allow yourself to leap like that. When you allow yourself to really go out there and say, this is me. And it's not coming from a place of take it or leave it. It comes from a place of this is me. And I know that I've got gifts that I need to give to the world. And I know that that my presence is going to make a difference, and I'm showing up. And that's all you can ever do, is just keep showing up. And whether that means you're in a winter and you show up in your winter with all the grief that you need to feel, you show up in your spring with all the growth, you show up in the summer and you bloom if it feels like you should, you show up in your autumn and you really allow yourself to harvest that and let the rest go. Just keep showing up. You know, that's all you can really do, is keep showing up. And the more you do it, the braver you become. The braver you become, the easier it is to really just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and know that you doing that makes a difference. It matters. It has always mattered. And you giving yourself permission to do that, here it is today. You needed permission. I'm giving you a slip, because people need to hear what you've got to say. People need to see what you're doing. And it's time to just keep showing up and taking one step at a time. So I hope that is helpful. If you have any questions about the different stages, just feel free to reach out, and keep living regeneratively. Keeping to the cycles of nature. This is the natural way of living. And you'll find that the more you do that, the easier it is to really just grow gracefully and to let things die gracefully, so that you can really step forward and be who you're meant to be. Okay, so have a great day forward, and we'll speak to you next week. Bye.